I wonder what it would be like to fly to Lisbon, Portugal and capture the Tour de Belém on large format. Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah. Oh. I have to pack and lug all that ridiculously huge camera gear with me. In this video, I'll show you how I made traveling with this 8x10 field camera relatively painless and efficient. In 2018, I flew to Portugal to do some large format work of my grandparents' former country home. While I had flown several times with my Zone 6 Studios 4x5 camera, I had never attempted air travel anywhere with my 8x10 version. As I began packing, I started to realize that I had some challenges to overcome. The biggest and foremost was that of weight and trying to stay within the airline regulations of 50 pounds per checked bag to avoid overage charges. The airfare alone was pricey, so I wasn't interested in making my luxurious travel in coach class feel even more sumptuous. At the time, the only case I owned capable of fitting this 8x10 camera was a Pelican 1650 case with the foam inserts. But there were two problems with this case. The first of which was that it weighed 28 pounds. Yes, that's just the weight of the case with nothing in it. That would only leave me with 22 pounds for my gear. That's a long way to travel with a whole lot of dead weight. I don't think so. The other problem was that I had already shaped the foam inserts to hold my studio strobes. While I still had all the little bits so that I could reconfigure the case to fit my camera, the weight of the case held me back. Just as a side note, you can purchase replacement inserts like a padded divider set, but they cost half of what you would pay for a new case. For me, the only viable option was to find a case that was lighter and had a padded divider set so that I could configure the case in any manner I wanted and change it to accommodate different uses. So I sold my old case and found the Pelican 1615 air-wheeled hard case with a padded divider insert. It's a strong, durable case with a foam cushion on the inside of the cover and a retractable handle. The best part is that this case only weighs 19 pounds. That's pretty good considering that this is a hard case that is crush-proof, dust-proof, and watertight. Maybe I can float this case in the Narrows at Zion National Park and pull it along on a rope. Okay, maybe that's not the best idea. But here's something else I like. These padded dividers allow me to change the configuration as my needs change. It's been my experience that for the way I like to work, I need that flexibility, so this case is perfect for me. While the reason I initially purchased this case was for travel to Portugal, most of the time this case is used to store my studio strobes and related miscellaneous parts. In recent years, I used it to haul my photo and video gear on location, so it's nice to have the flexibility to quickly change up the configuration depending upon the type of shoot. But that's just what works for me. If you know that you'll never multi-purpose your case, then foam inserts are great and offer maximum protection for your equipment. Personally, I like to minimize the amount of gear I own because I just don't have the space to store all of this stuff. So I just focus on the items I use and try to purchase items that have multiple uses. Most importantly, I also try to sell the gear that I'm no longer using. It's refreshing to make more space for other stuff. Aside from the weight and padded dividers, the other nice features that I was looking for were, does it roll and does it have a collapsible handle to make it easier for travel? Yes on both accounts. Sold! The perfect case to do the job. Now all I needed to do was to figure out how I was going to safely pack all of my gear and underwear into this thing. Oh, and I almost forgot. I need to pack my digital camera kit too. Don't! I'm getting stressed thinking about it. Okay, let's take a breather here. I've got this. Since it's been almost 6 years since I've taken my trip, I've made some efficient upgrades to my kit. So I'll show you how I would pack my gear for air travel with my current setup. My first order of business is to arrange the padded dividers. Just like then, I place my field camera closest to the wheels so that the weight is towards the bottom of the case when I'm rolling it around for transport. It's important to note that I remove the ground glass from the camera. I'll talk about how I safely prepare and transport the ground glass later on in this video. Then I wrestle with the Velcro to place my padded divider right up against the camera to create a partition. Both my Zone 6 Studios and Chamonix Convertible X 8x10 cameras fit in this space well protected, just not at the same time. Then I'll take my Gitzo 1542T travel tripod, extend the center column, and fold the legs up towards the ball head attachment plate to save on length. I place the tripod into the case diagonally because that's the only way I can get it to fit. Then I place my lens bag and accessory bag into the case by straddling the tripod. In case you missed it, I'll leave a link to a recent video in the description where I discuss my entire 8x10 kit in more detail. I have also included Amazon links to equipment I use frequently if you want to check that out too. If you'd like to support me and help me pay for my ridiculously expensive 8x10 film, please consider using those Amazon links for products that you already had intentions of purchasing. This way we both can keep on creating content. Thanks in advance for choosing to do so. I add a padded divider for a small compartment to cushion my Nikon Nikkor 450mm lens. Next, I rotate my PhotoPro FPH42Q ball head into its most compact position so that it fits nicely into this corner. I place 3 film holders on top of the camera, and I keep the holders in these padded sleeves made by Dan Stone of Stone Photo Gear. When I prepared my gear for my 2018 trip, I didn't own these sleeves and just placed them in this padded laptop case. Either way, they'll be perfectly protected. Just remember to alternate the positioning of the holders to keep them flat, secure, and save space. The reason for this is that the end of the holder where the dark slide is inserted and removed is often thicker than the rest of the holder. But that varies among manufacturers. Well, look at that! There's still plenty of room for underwear. Breaking the ground glass so far away from home would have been devastating. Can you imagine trying to source one or attempting to make one? I had a lot of trouble sourcing a tripod on this same trip, so I can't imagine trying to find a solution to replace my ground glass. If you haven't seen my tripod story video, I'll leave a link to it in the description. There were many lessons learned from that debacle. The most important part about keeping my ground glass secure was detaching it from the camera by removing the screws and retaining clips. This was easy to do and prevented breakage from high impact handling and the transfer of any subsequent vibration to the ground glass and contact points. Then I simply placed it in an old cardboard flap and pouch from Fujifilm and placed it in an empty Fujifilm box. I think it goes without saying, but I transported the boxed up ground glass along with my film in my personal carry-on bag. The added bonus was that now I had a spare light-tight box to put my exposed film into as I was shooting through my film stocks. Speaking of film, how did I safely travel with my expensive 8x10 film and keep it organized while on location? First, let me explain that my goal was to carry Fujifilm Velvia 50, Kodak Ektar 100, and Ilford Delta 100 so that I could have a variety of choices based upon the scene I was shooting. I purchased one box of each film stock and carried them in my personal carry-on bag through security and onto the plane in their original sealed boxes. My rationale for keeping the boxes factory sealed was that when I requested a hand inspection of the film, it would be less likely to fall open or look more suspicious, especially if it was duct taped shut. I think it's important to note that in 2018, when I took this trip, the new powerful and film damaging CT scanners were not being used. I wouldn't have been all that worried about being forced to pass my film through the conventional scanners at that time because I had done it for decades with absolutely no issues. However, today, I wouldn't attempt to carry my expensive sheet film with me. Hands down, no way. CT scanners damage film. But don't take my word for it. Lena Besanova has an excellent excellent video where she aptly applied the scientific method to answer the questions of, do CT scanners damage film, and to what degree is the damage across the variety of film stocks and ISOs. Please keep in mind that with all experiments, there are variables outside of the experimenter's control, especially outside of the laboratory setting. Lena has done an outstanding job of identifying these confounding variables in her experiment. I'll leave a link to her video in the description. Interestingly, this debate of passing film through airport security scanners has been frustratingly going on for decades. Asriel Knight has a great video reviewing articles from past photography magazines discussing this topic. I'll leave a link to that video in the description as well. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide whether or not you want to risk being forced to have your film scanned by one of these CT scanners. Personally, I'm not going to risk damaging my expensive film, even if the damage is minimal. From what I've seen, photographers report having anywhere from very little damage to the contrast and color of the film, all the way up to heavy lines spanning the majority of the film frames. In my mind, it's just not worth it. Today, I would approach the solution to this problem a little differently. The first course of action I would pursue would be that of sourcing the film from a retailer that was local to my destination. This option is more than likely not going to work for many destinations because film is just not common in many stores as it once was. Especially trying to find 8x10 sheet film. How many people are actually shooting this format? I don't know, but it can't be that many. So if finding a local retailer doesn't work, now what? Depending where I was traveling to, the next best option would be to consider mailing my film directly from the retailer to a hotel or family member or friend at my destination. This is a tactic that I have used in the past and it worked great. And if that doesn't work, then I'm sticking with my Canon R5C. It's a fantastic camera. Although the Fujifilm GFX 102 looks awfully tempting, it might be a good time to consider renting, right? That's a great way to take a camera for a test drive. While I was in Portugal, I kept my exposed film of all types in one box. Yes, can you believe that? How did I keep everything organized and not get my film mixed up? Did I just mix them all together and use the film code notches to differentiate them? Well, you could do it that way, but that seemed like a mistake waiting to happen, and I did not want to take any chances. Cross-process film just isn't for me. The key to my system was to use 3 old Fujifilm pouches and labels. I placed the labels on the pouches and used them as tactile indicators since I couldn't see them for obvious reasons. I used no label for my exposed Fujifilm Velvia 50, 1 label for my exposed Kodak Ektar, and 2 labels for my exposed Ilford Delta 100. This enabled me to feel for which pouch contained the respective type of exposed film and helped me keep them all separated. That made things super easy. Since I only had a total of 55 pieces of film, they fit comfortably into one Fujifilm box. These boxes are a little deeper than the Ilford and Kodak versions, so they're perfect for this kind of system. If you're wondering how I loaded and unloaded my film holders, I basically just used a bathroom with no window and placed a towel at the base of the door to cover the gap between the door and the floor. That makes for a great darkroom with no stray light beams that could potentially be recorded by the film. So you guessed it, I traveled 5,500 miles just about with no changing bag or film changing tent and only 3 film holders. What's wrong with traveling light? It's more fun that way. The reason for this is that I knew the location well and I knew that I wasn't going to be traveling far from that location for my 2-week stay. If I didn't know that I would have access to a room that I could use as a dark space, I would have definitely brought my Calumet changing tent, even though I don't really like using these devices. In my opinion, they just create barriers that limit my efficiency with loading my film holders, especially 8x10. But sometimes they're a necessary piece of gear. At home, I prefer to use my bathroom with no windows and block the bottom of the door. If I'm going on a road trip, I preload all my film holders into however many of my 14 8x10 film holders I think I'll shoot. This way, I'm not having to unload and reload when I'm out on location. Now, 28 pieces of film doesn't sound like a lot of shots, but remember, I typically only commit to 1 or 2 shots in an entire day. That's it. I'm ultra picky with my 8x10 film because I have a specific goal in mind for the final outcome. Circling back to my architectural project in Portugal, I only shot in the morning and evening because I wanted my images to have softer and warmer looking light and longer shadows. At the end and middle of the day, I loaded and reloaded each of my 3 film holders with the 3 different film stocks so that I wouldn't limit my choices. If the exposure latitude was within Velvia 50's 5-stop range, then that was my preferred film stock since I had 20 sheets with me. If the exposure latitude was greater than 5 stops, then I selectively used Kodak Ektar on the scene for the increased coverage in dynamic range. Since Ilford Delta 100 comes in a box of 25 sheets, I shot every scene that I shot on Velvia 50 or Ektar with this film stock, including some scenes not shot on color film. When my Ektar ran out, I just used the 3rd film holder for Ilford Delta 100 because of the greater versatility. Surprisingly, by the time I was done with my architectural project, I had 2 sheets of Fujifilm Velvia 50 remaining. I couldn't leave Portugal without exposing those last 2 sheets of film. That would be preposterous. So on my last night in Lisbon, I went to Belém and shot those last 2 sheets of film on the Torre de Belém. From my shooting vantage point, this scene would have benefited from using a 300mm lens, but in 2018, I didn't own my Nikon Nikkor 300mm M lens, and I refrained from packing my Schneider Apo Simar 300mm lens because the shutter was malfunctioning at slower shutter speeds. Unfortunately, my Nikon Nikkor 450mm lens was too narrow of an angle of view to use on this scene, so my only other choice was the Nikon Nikkor 150mm SW lens, which was too wide for this scene. But hey, at least I can crop in, right? It's 8x10 film. If I ever get a chance to photograph this iconic location again, I definitely will bring my 300mm lens. Note to self, I think that focal length should suit this scene fairly well. What did I do about film developing? Initially, I thought about having the film developed while I was in Lisbon, but I just ran out of time. I did find a few places that actually develop 4x5 and 8x10 sheet film of all film stocks, so that was a very viable option that I couldn't take advantage of. In the future, this is exactly the route I would choose, but it would take more careful planning on my part to ensure that I had plenty of time to fit this in. On my 2018 trip, I simply transported my box of 55 sheets of exposed film in my personal carry-on bag all the way back to Las Vegas and developed it using my Jobo processor. If you are interested in seeing how I develop all my film stocks, I'll leave a link to those videos in the description. For those of you that are curious, how did I carry my digital kit? That was the easy part. I just used my Pelican 1510 case for all that gear. I even fit 2 hot shoe flashes with pocket wizards. That's one of the greatest advantages of using a 35mm or even 120 format size. It can all easily fit into a case that meets the maximum dimensions for carry-on luggage. In the end, every piece of film turned out great. It was a fun architectural project that I'd like to someday turn into a coffee table book for my family to enjoy. But no coffee mugs allowed on the book. That's an accident waiting to happen. If you've enjoyed reliving the thrills and challenges of packing with me, please like this video and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Together, let's make this channel ridiculously huge. As always, thanks for watching. Oh, fudge.